Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and previously, my only experience with Super Mario Land was a few snippets that Nintendo saw fit to sneak into the WarioWare games via 9Volts campaign. While I've never been as into Mario as I was some other series, it's still a platformer and it's still a Nintendo game, so I was right in that category of curious enough to try it, but not to the point of seeking it out myself. And guess what? They put it on NSO not too terribly long ago. Lucky me. I went into it with very few expectations and found myself a little surprised by what I found. Part of it the box and official art could have prepared me for, but it is kind of an oddball title, or at least it is when you're used to the typical Mushroom Kingdom shenanigans. Not the biggest game either, so let's give it a mini review. I have no instruction booklet and there's next to no dialogue in the game itself, so I needed to look up a plot summary on the wiki and... yeah, it's about as simple as you'd expect. Princess Daisy of Sarasa Land is kidnapped by Tatanga, an alien that can use hypnosis. The only bit that surprises me is the psychic powers thing, otherwise, it's about what I expected. It's Mario, it's not too complicated. There is something kind of funny though that the setup is pretty much the same as in any other Mario game, just replace 4 words. Daisy for Peach, Sarasa Land with Mushroom Kingdom, Tatanga with Bowser, and Hypnosis with fire breathing, and it would be exactly the same as it always is, almost like someone was trying to make things legally distinct but wasn't very creative. Since it's still Mario, still owned by Nintendo, I almost wonder why they went with the find replace instead of a copy paste, but I can't deny that the setting in Sarasa Land does a lot to distinguish this game, with some of its Egyptian and Chinese settings and enemies, so you know what? The slight tweaks actually do manage to do a lot to make this game stand out. I'm actually kinda surprised that I don't think this location ever comes back, and kind of would like to see a revisit at some point, maybe just a single world in a full Mario title. You're Mario, so you jump. No surprise there, and this is the primary way you hurt enemies. You can also hold a button to run. Your default state is puny, but a mushroom will make you bigger so that you can break blocks and take a hit. There's also a Super Ball power-up, which you get from something that looks similar to a fire flower. Grab this and you can huck a ball by tapping the run button that will bounce off surfaces, hurt enemies, and even collect coins for you. You can only throw one ball out at once, so try to be choosy about when you attack. You won't be able to launch another until it goes off screen. Get hit in either of your powered up forms and you'll go back to Tiny Mario again. Die if you take damage while small or by falling into a pit. You have so many lives, but as usual, you can get more by collecting 100 coins, though getting a heart will also grant you an extra. Die at 0 lives, get a game over. There are also power stars, which will make you invincible to attacks and enemies for a limited time. Other than the Super Ball, pretty standard stuff. As for how it controls, I guess it's pretty similar to early Mario. You still have pretty floaty jumps, you can still feel a little slippery while running. I played the original Super Mario Bros. A few times to compare, and funnily enough, going to land made the controls feel a little too sensitive, whereas going back to Bros made me feel pretty heavy. I imagine part of its screen size. It probably didn't feel like you were going too far too fast on the tiny Gameboy, but blown up on a television, it can make it feel like you're really zooming. I normally gravitate to platformers with more stable footing and jumps, but this run speed, along with a few other things, makes land feel a little more awkward, even for Mario. Sometimes I'd have trouble jumping while running. There were a few times I swear I fell through a platform I should have landed on, and hitboxes can feel really off. This is another thing that I might not have noticed as much on original hardware, but it certainly took some getting used to here. There are 4 worlds, each with 3 stages, for a total of 12 levels. The first 2 are just standard stages. You travel through them, hit blocks for coins and power-ups, and go down pipes. There are 2 exits in each. Get a bonus if you take the upper door, where you can either win a Super Ball or 1, 2, or 3 lives by carefully timing where you and a ladder will spawn in, though you're guaranteed to get something regardless. The lower door will just simply clear the level. And the third stage contains a boss, which will also grant you a bonus game, after you travel either through a pyramid with traps, or do a vehicle section where you're either in a submarine or plane, though each function the same way. Move around the screen and fire. They're a fun alternative to the standard water level, where you can travel freely, but here you don't need to swim to control your altitude. As for the individual worlds, the first is Egyptian, with pyramids in the background, and contains basic platforming, with some trees to hop around on in 1-2 that remind me of the NES titles. The second stage is over an ocean. Or lava. At least the Game Boy Color makes it seem like it. Lots of places where you can fall to your death, so tread carefully. The third seems to be Easter Island, with Moai statues in the background and foreground in the form of enemies, and a bunch of rocky surfaces with some boulders that you have to ride. And the fourth is China, with bamboo and ramen bowl patterns in the background, with you needing to weave around pipes and enemies. Beat a world, find a fake princess, and steal yourself to move on. Not too different than the Your Princess is in Another Castle setup. The stages aren't bad, no crazy gimmicks, but the layouts are pretty decent. It's the baddies though that add a lot of the flavor. And speaking of, it's not just the setting that's different, the enemies are too. Well, mostly. Goombos are pretty much Goombas, and Koopas explode after you stomp on them. It took a lot of rewinds before I put that one together, me going back and trying to figure out why I couldn't pick up or kick the shell, and how long it took them to pop back out. There's also some paratroopers? Wait, I'm told these are bees, that fly by and drop spears now. Instead of arcing cheap cheeps, we get bonefish that jump straight up, there's killable spiders instead of thwomps, and octopuses that float in place instead of bobbing bloopers. Piranha plants have been replaced by longer chompy flowers, and bullet bill cannons now pop out of pipes. Then there are the more unique enemies, like the aforementioned Moai statues that can run or flap your way, worms and sphinxes that spit balls at you, Zhangxi that hop about, seahorses that pop out and fire attacks at you like Zelda enemies, there's some robots, and there's birds and planes that fly around the sky. Honestly, none of it's too weird, they just feel weird for a Mario game, with how many established recurring baddies they have. If I didn't know better, I'd question whether this wasn't another Doki Doki Panic situation, where another game was reskinned just to make the playable characters, or character in this case, be from Mario. As for the bosses, there's 5. The first 3, you don't need to actually fight, you can just run past to hit the switch, much like Super Mario Bros. 1 Bowser. The first is a Sphinx that breathes fire, yeah, just like Bowser. The second is a projectile-spewing seahorse, and the third, a rock-throwing statue. I normally take out the seahorse, then finish the level, but with the other 2, I'll tank a hit and then run past. The last 2 bosses are back-to-back, and you need to take them out. One is a cloud that bounces around like a screensaver and spawns out bird enemies. The second is Tatonga, who fires balls that split into 3 projectiles that you need to weave between. They're all pretty simple, and while Tatonga does take a little longer than I'd expect, I'd say all of them don't overstay their welcome. Ironically, the platforming bosses I find boring, but the ones in the vehicle levels can be pretty fun. The visuals are rough in this one. It's the Game Boy, so you might be thinking, what you'd expect. But other series like Mega Man, Kirby, and Pokemon actually manage to get the most out of the limited hardware and stay pretty true to their typical aesthetic. But saying that the sprites here are simplified would be putting it mildly. When I played this on stream, one person even questioned whether the one thing I stomped on was a Goomba. I think even Super Mario Land 2 on the same hardware manages to be a huge step up, but I guess with as early as this title was, Nintendo didn't quite have everything down. If I didn't have so many other better looking Game Boy games to compare to, I could accept this as being a simple hardware limitation, but since I do, I have to say that this is hard to look at, regardless of which iteration of the handheld you play it on. The music is simple, about what you'd expect. Most of what I heard immediately left my memory, but there were a few that stood out. The track for the pyramid and cave section was pretty decent, but as the only track I recognized, since it was used in Smash, I think I was kinda predisposed for it being a favorite. The music used for World 4 sounds very Asian, stereotypically so, with how it starts out. And I did not expect them to use a classical piece for the invincibility music. Really weird choice, but it did get a smile out of me. Overall, short game, not a lot of tracks, and while people will probably take note of the 3 I mentioned for the same reasons, for the most part, it's inoffensive but not super memorable. I'd say the game is a decent challenge. My first run, I have used the heck out of the rewind, but my second, I avoided using it or reloading a save state, so it's definitely the sort of thing you can get down. Still though, there's my complaints with the controls, plus with how stingy this game seems to be with power-ups, you can spend a lot of time as puny Mario, so it's easy to die a lot very quickly, either from enemies or pits. I think 3-2 was where I lost most of my lives, and while I didn't game over, I did get down to 0 as I was clearing World 3. On the plus side, while they don't give you a lot of power-ups, The checkpoints feel very generous, and when you spawn back in, it clears out the enemies in the immediate area, giving you a bit of breathing room. If you're on top of things, there's a lot of places, both hidden and in plain sight, to rack up coins, and you can get a bunch of easy lives if you can get the bonus game at the end of the standard levels. I'd say this would be a nightmare to clear on original hardware, with the small screen and lack of save states and rewinds, since a game over will boot you back to the title screen, but if you're playing this on Switch or something else with those options, it's an easy hour or less clear, though there probably will still be some frustration your first time through regardless. I don't hate the game. It's actually pretty cute. Its two big selling points are the unique settings and short runtime. Sarasa Land is worth exploring just for the novelty of it, but as I've mentioned, I don't think it would be all that strange if the typical Mario aesthetic hadn't already been pounded into my head. It being as short as it is and it being easily available on Nintendo Switch Online though are certainly points in its favor. While I wouldn't want to pay whatever a Game Boy cartridge cost back in 1989, I would have only been 1 year old anyway, with the current state of things, it's kind of a just why not sort of thing. If you're not just looking for an easy addition to your clear log or don't really care about visiting exotic, real-world inspired locations as Mario though, you'll probably be better served playing one of the mainline games instead. I really need to get back to them, but I remember Super Mario Bros. 3 being a favorite, and 2 is probably the most unique of those old titles. And if you're feeling modern, did I ever mention how good Wonder was? So yeah, not a bad game, but not an earth-shaking one either. I'm mostly recommending it due to how accessible and low commitment it is. But hey, what about you? Have you played it? Will you play it? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Was it meh? Am I being too harsh on the little guy? And should I do any other Mario games? I'll admit, this is a really weird one to start with. That'll do it for me, so thanks as always for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into platformers. I typically do Mega Man stuff. Hi, I'm Daisy, woohoo!